Hello, welcome to part 2 about Tom Crean. In this, I am talking about Discovery leaving New Zealand and heading to the Antarctic, the crew exploring Antarctica, tragedy, harsh weather, Discovery being stuck in the ice, mourning in Terra Nova the relief ships, Discovery released from the ice, and heading home. Discovery left New Zealand on Christmas Day in 1901. The crew wasn't in a festive mood after what happened to Bono, so the Christmas dinner was postponed to the 5th of January, and on the same day, Discovery entered the Antarctic Circle. As the ship was plowing through the Southern Ocean, a crew member, Duncan from Dundee, Scotland, wrote this. New Year's morning broke fine, bringing back memories of old, turning my thoughts to my dear loved ones at home. We, being about 14,000 miles from them and in latitude where there has not been any ships for a century, and I may say cut off from the civilized world, but return as yet being doubtful, hoping for the best. The crew on the Discovery enjoyed the good weather, which was fortunate with the notorious reputation of the stormy Southern Ocean. And the ocean has a ferocious stretch of water on Earth and strong gale which would pose a serious threat to the crew and ship. Scott, in charge, admitted if they had met any storm, it would have been exceedingly unpleasant, and the ship would have lost deck cargo of provision cases like heaps of coal, 45 terrified sheep, and 23 dogs. I did say Markham didn't want to use dogs as beasts of burden, but dogs were used in the expedition. On January 2nd, 1902, the Discovery first sighted an iceberg, and a day later, the Discovery slipped past the Antarctic Circle. Recorded on 8th January 1902, Scott wrote, all who were not on deck quickly gathered there to take their first look at the Antarctic continent. The sun, now near the southern horizon, still shone in the cloudless sky, giving us full daylight. But life wasn't great on the Discovery. According to Thomas Williamson, the crew weren't too happy with the Navy routine of scrubbing the deck in freezing temperatures. Frank Wild bluntly wrote in a letter home, the voyage out to New Zealand was neither eventful nor happy. Scott biographer Roland Huntford basically wrote the men were depressed by the Navy routine and felt uninformed and nervous. Also, no one bothered to tell the sailors where they were going nor for how long, apparently. Bonacci, an experienced Antarctic explorer who was on the 1899 Carlson expedition, the same Carlson I mentioned in the last video, who wanted to camp at the Antarctic over the winter, had a completely different view of what life was like on the Discovery. According to his book, The Saga of Discovery, Discovery throughout the whole of her 3 years commission was what is known as a happy ship. One cannot recall a serious quarrel either among the officers or the men. She was afloat in the boat of harmony and peace. Okay. While the expedition was the best equipped Britain had ever sent to Antarctica, and with the three veteran explorers, one of the Antarctic, Bonacci, and two of the Arctic, Lieutenant Albert Ambers and Dr. Regnault, none of the officers had any knowledge and understanding of polar matters. So why did Scott have to lead to the 1901-1904 Antarctic expedition without any sort of experience? As I said before in the last video, Scott was Markham's protege, and Scott is a Navy man, and plus it would advance his personal status in the Navy. So, 9th of January 1902, Discovery sailed closer to land and anchored at Robinson Bay near Cape Adare, where Carlson and Bonacci wintered in 1899. Some of the men made a brief visit to the hut. Scott led an expedition down south to the Antarctic with vague instructions about where to dock and where the wintering site is and what if the Discovery was crushed by the ice. What to do, and would be difficult to know where the search parties are to go if the crew is lost. But the only way to communicate is a tin box at the camp. It is the only communication to the outside world. Discovery sailed along the coast and discovered new land on the 30th of January 1902, and Scott called it Edward VII Land in honor of their new king. On the 3rd of February, Tom Crean was chosen for the first brief expedition sledding journey with Amos and Bonacci and three others went across the ice in the unknown southern hinterland. This will be known as where the ice barrier meets the land. The six men stayed that night in the tent which only fits three. The following morning, the six men, sleeping uncomfortably cramped in the three-man tent, returned to the Discovery that afternoon. But while it was uncomfortable in the tent, they were kept warm and found out the barrier was way colder than sleeping on Discovery. But the first two balloon ascents happened while Crean and the other men were exploring the hinterland. The balloon ascent was suggested by another Arctic veteran, Joseph Hooker, because it would serve a better view of the unknown landscape, if they used a hydrogen-filled balloon, that is. Scott elected himself to go in the cramped basket, and he was the first to go up in the balloon, and also the first to nearly get killed. Scott was up in the balloon by 500 feet and threw weights full of sand out of the basket and shot right up to 800 feet. Luckily, the chain halted any further climb and the balloon was brought down. One could imagine Scott got right out of the basket as soon it landed on the snow as soon as possible. But while those at the Discovery campsite saw Scott nearly went bye-bye, Shackleton hopped in the basket and went up to take a picture, and once he came down, the photo showed nothing of interest. One of the explorers, Wilson, irritated by what happened, apparently said it was perfect madness to allow novices to risk their lives. Although Wilson would probably be happy to know after Shackleton's ascent, the balloon had leaked and wasn't used again. But there already would be enough anxiety of where the winter quarters should be, and what if Discovery gets stuck in the ice. By 8th of February, Scott had reached McMurdo Sound in Ross Sea, which is close to the imposing volcano Mount Erebus, edge of the Great Ice Barrier. It was decided this will be the area for the expedition base camp, which will be called Hut Point, and a party of men arrived at the shore to erect a hut and bring provisions, and it was long, hard work. Originally, the plan apparently was to winter in New Zealand and leave a party of men behind to get the exploration ready for spring and summer. But instead, Scott decided Hut Point would be perfect for winter quarters. Now, the ship was to be expected to be stuck in the ice, but it was believed the ice will thaw when spring and summer come round in 1903. Foresight would be a wonderful thing, because Discovery was stuck for 2 years. Crean was 25 years old when the Discovery was sailing south to the Antarctic, and the crew quickly recognized he was dependable and a stalwart member of the Discovery party. Crean himself, like the rest of his fellow crewmates, adapted to life on the ice and became a highly capable sledger. and the officers discovered Crean obeyed orders and he can man-haul sledge quicker than most. Crean expedition records he spent 149 days man-hauling sledges in the Antarctic. Now, he wasn't the only person man-hauling sledges. The other men of a party of 48 who man-hauled sledges more than Crean were Scott, who did the most days of hauling sledges in 193 days, Evans 173 days, Skelton did 171 days, Albert Quarterly 169 days, Barnes 162 days, Wilson 158, and Hansley 153. Ashley and Wyatt did it too, but Crean was ahead of them by many weeks. Crean accompanied Lieutenant Bard on 3 sledging trips for exploration and laid supplies at depots for other parties. But it is soon realized by the men hauling sledges how difficult the environment and how dangerous Antarctic would be. While every party member had difficulty in the environment in the early days at the Antarctic exploration, Tom Crean, who grew up in rural Ireland and rose up in the ranks of the British Navy, endured the Antarctic harsh environment and passed it with flying colours, apparently. It takes an Irishman from rural Ireland to take the Antarctic on the chin and act like no bother at all, because Tom Crean, according to his fellow crewmates, would break into song and make his mates laugh with his wit. Scott and Shackleton would often bring Crean with them on trips to the Antarctic. On the 4th of March 1902, a 12-man party was divided into two, and they went to Cape Crozier to leave a note of the discovery position. A blizzard hit the party, and while they did set up the tent, the men panicked and scared of their vulnerability left with their gear in the tent, and they set out to go back to the ship. But instead, they came across a steep, icy slope, and they soon realized someone could fall to their death. Sadly, that is what happened. George Finch lost his footing, and because his boots didn't have spikes, he sped past his startled colleagues and fell 300 feet into Ross Sea. His body was never found. The search party Tom Crean was part of went to look for those who were probably scattered because of the blizzard. The search parties came across Evans, Barnes, and Quarterly wandering around the slopes and dazed at Castle Rock. Lloyds came back with his party in the evening, so it was believed by the camp they lost 2 people, Vince and Hare, a Stewart. But by a miracle, Hare came back the day after 36 hours wandering around in the open Antarctic environment. Now the crew had learned the hard way. Life in the Antarctic is brutal. But the worst was yet to come. Winter was coming, and on the 23rd of April, it came for 4 months of Antarctica darkness. Bonacci, who has been here before recasted, wrote about this expedition. Autumn was at an end. Sledging has been a failure. Food, clothing, everything was wrong. There will be much to think about and much to rearrange during the long winter night. So what was Scott to do? Scott insisted on keeping to the naval routine and keeping the men and officers separated. I said Scott is a naval man. Duncan, the Scotsman, wrote about how the crew had to stand on deck in a temperature of minus 23 degrees. The typical day for the crew. A party of men get a chunk of ice to melt for drinking water, 8:30 a.m. for breakfast, which was a major meal, and it had hot porridge, seal liver, if anyone fancies it, and fresh baked bread and sticky jam. On 30th of October 1902, Crean was in a 12-man supporting team led by Lieutenant Bond, while the main 3-man team led by Scott went south with Shackleton and Wilson. Scott's team went further south, while the supporting team would lay supplies at the depot when the main team returned. The 12-man party were flying the Union Jack with Tom Crean, a proud Irishman flew the Irish flag, green background with a jack in the corner and a golden hop in the center. Also, there was a banner saying, "No dogs need apply." The supporting party were gone for 35 days when they returned back on 20th December to their discovery, but Scott, Shackleton, and Wilson set off again on 2nd November. They had a strenuous journey, and it took a more larger toll on them going to the barrier because they had a heavier load. They didn't know how to properly use the skis, even though they learned how to use it, and they couldn't control the dogs. So they resorted to the old method of man hauling of 500 pounds of supplies. On the 14th December, 5 weeks into their travel, the three men only covered 2 miles. They were hungry and developing scurvy. The men were gone for 3 months, and during that time, skis were abandoned and the dogs, sadly, Scott had to dispose of them. Shackleton was in a worse state. Eventually, Scott sent Shackleton home on a relief ship called Morning. Shackleton broke down and wept, but he would return to the Antarctic with his own expedition. Fear was growing by the men in the early 1903 discovery should have been released, but still the ice was frozen and they didn't want to stay for another 12 months. So Morning went back to England to relay the predicament the men were in. Long story short, the men continued as they did during 1902, kept on exploring Antarctica. Until 1904, Morning returned with Terra Nova, a whaling ship, which, lo and behold, Shackleton was part of the crew to get the men home. But there was a problem. Discovery. Everyone worked hard to free Discovery from the ice. And while working to free Discovery, Crean himself nearly died twice on the same day by going through the ice. It's one of the times Crean nearly meets his end at the Antarctic. Scott was tempted to leave Discovery behind since there was still 2 miles of ice between Discovery and the relief ships. But on the 14th of January 1904, Discovery was freed and the crew celebrated, and when the last case of ice blew up on the 16th, the three ships left on the 19th of February 1904. And Tom Crean returned to the Navy and was promoted to first class petty officer. So, that's it for now. See ya in part 3.